The moment I saw her dragging a sun lounger across my backyard like she owned the place, I knew my day was about to take a nosedive straight into the depths of entitled hell. There she was, decked out in blindingly bright yoga pants, an oversized designer knockoff handbag slung over her shoulder, and that unmistakable Karen haircut perched atop her head like a crown of self-importance. Her perfectly manicured hand clutched a Starbucks cup, half-emptied, yet somehow still the most important thing in her possession. But the real kicker? She had sunglasses propped up on her head, scanning my property like she was inspecting a vacation resort she'd just checked into. I was standing on my porch, hose in hand, watering the plants, watching in disbelief as this stranger casually rearranged my patio furniture, mumbling to herself about how the last owners had better taste. It took me a solid 10 seconds to process that this wasn't a fever dream, that I wasn't hallucinating from the heat, and that, oh yeah, this woman had just walked into my backyard completely uninvited and was making herself comfortable. I cleared my throat loudly, hoping she'd startle and realize her mistake. Instead, she turned around, waved at me like I was the staff at her private beach house, and said, "Oh good, you're here. Be a dear and grab the rest of the chairs from the side of the house, would you? My guests are arriving soon, and this setup is just atrocious." I stared at her, mouth slightly open, brain short-circuiting as I tried to comprehend the audacity unfolding before me. "I'm sorry, what?" I finally managed. She sighed dramatically, as if I was the one being unreasonable, before giving me a patronizing look. "The chairs. By the shed. I assume you're the new tenant, right? Look, I don't know what kind of arrangement you made with the owner, but this pool has been open to the community for years. I have a standing agreement to host my summer gatherings here, and I don't plan on changing that just because someone new is temporarily staying here. So, if you could just do your job and help set up, that would be great." It took every ounce of self-control I had not to laugh, or scream, or launch my garden hose directly at her face. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, very slowly, "I own this house." Silence. For the first time since she invaded my backyard, she actually paused and looked at me, like I had just told her I was secretly the King of England. Then she blinked, took a slow sip of her Starbucks, and said, "No, you don't?" I let out a humorless chuckle. "Yes, I do." Her expression twisted into a smirk, the kind of smirk that made my blood pressure skyrocket instantly. "Oh, honey," she cooed, taking a step forward like she was about to deliver some life-changing wisdom. "I don't think you understand. The last owners and I had a verbal agreement. I've been using this pool for years. They never had a problem with it, so neither should you. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement." I stared at her, still baffled at her level of delusion. "An arrangement?" I echoed, wondering if she had somehow suffered heatstroke and this was all some kind of heat-induced hallucination. "Yeah," she said with an exaggerated shrug. "Maybe I slip you a little something every month and you let me use the pool whenever I want. No big deal. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Everyone wins." There were so many things wrong with that statement I didn't even know where to begin. The fact that she was trying to bribe me to use my own property? The way she spoke as if my home was a public facility she had unlimited access to? Or the sheer audacity of thinking she could dismiss my ownership of my own house because she had some non-existent verbal agreement with the previous owners? I didn't even need to think about my answer. "No." Her smile twitched. "Excuse me?" I crossed my arms, now fully engaged in this absurd battle of wills. "No. You're not using my pool. This is private property, and I never agreed to let you or anyone else use it." She scoffed, placing a hand on her hip like a soap opera villain about to deliver a monologue. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you. This is about community. About tradition. This pool has been a part of our summers for years. You can't just come in and change that." I could feel my sanity slipping away with every word that left her mouth. "That's exactly what I can do," I said, rubbing my temples. "Because, and I cannot stress this enough, It's my house. Her jaw clenched, the realization slowly setting in that I wasn't going to roll over and let her do whatever she wanted. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "We'll see about that," she huffed, snatching her phone from her bag. "I'm calling the police." That was it. That was my breaking point. "Please do," I said, motioning towards the gate. "In fact, let's wait for them together. I'd love for them to hear how you broke into my backyard, started rearranging my furniture, and tried to bribe me to let you use my property like it's a community pool." She froze mid-dial, her eyes narrowing. "You're making a big mistake," she seethed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Neither do you." For a moment we stood there in an awkward silence, a silent standoff in the blazing afternoon sun. And then, as if to add one final layer of insanity to the situation, she turned on her heel, strutted towards my pool, and, before I could react, cannonballed into the water. I blinked. I blinked again. My brain completely shut down as I watched this fully grown woman float to the surface with a smug grin, arms stretched out as if she had just claimed victory in some kind of deranged territorial dispute. "See?" she said, pushing her sunglasses back onto her face. "I told you. This pool belongs to the community." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but all that came out was a strangled noise of disbelief. She had officially lost it. I had officially lost it. The whole world had officially lost it. And just when I thought this couldn't get any more ridiculous, the side gate creaked open, and in walked my wife, arms full of groceries, eyes wide with confusion as she took in the scene of a complete stranger lounging in our pool like she was on a 5-star resort vacation. Her gaze flickered between me, the drenched lunatic in our pool, and the absurdity of the situation. "Do I even want to know?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I sighed. "No. But the police might." The moment my wife stepped into the backyard, juggling grocery bags and frozen in sheer disbelief at the sight of a random woman floating in our pool like she owned it, I knew this situation was about to escalate in ways I wasn't prepared for. She slowly placed the bags down on the outdoor table, her eyes locked on Karen, who was now casually doing a backstroke across the water as if she was on a luxury cruise. My wife crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly, the universal sign for what the actual hell am I looking at? I exhaled sharply, rubbing my face before motioning toward the floating lunatic. "Honey, I actually don't know her name, but she seems to think she owns our backyard." Karen, hearing this, flipped onto her stomach and propped herself up at the pool's edge, resting her chin on her folded arms with the most infuriatingly smug smile I had ever seen. "I'm Karen," she said in a sickeningly sweet voice, "and I'm just using my usual summer spot. I assume you're the wife?" My wife blinked, inhaled deeply, and then turned to me. "Do I hit her with the pool net or just call the cops?" The fact that she wasn't even addressing Karen directly made the situation somehow even funnier and more chaotic at the same time. Karen's smile faltered, but only for a second before she turned on her signature entitlement mode. "Wow, that's so aggressive. I don't know why you're acting so hostile. I've been using this pool for years. The previous owners never had an issue with it, and I refuse to let you two ruin a perfectly good neighborhood arrangement." She splashed a bit, as if emphasizing her point, before stretching out and floating on her back again, arms behind her head in total relaxation. My wife gave me one long, exasperated look before reaching into her pocket, pulling out her phone and tapping the screen. "You calling the cops?" I asked, hopeful. "No," she said. "I'm filming this, because if I tell people this happened and don't have video proof, no one's going to believe me." I nearly choked on a laugh while Karen gasped in offense, immediately snapping into a sitting position in the water. "Excuse me. That is a violation of my privacy. I do not consent to being recorded." My wife arched an eyebrow but didn't stop recording. "You broke into my backyard, trespassed onto my property, and are now lounging in my pool. And you think you have privacy rights?" Karen opened and closed her mouth, clearly struggling to come up with a response that made sense. But instead, she huffed loudly and started wading toward the steps. I thought, finally, maybe she's coming to her senses and leaving. But no. Of course not. That would be too easy. Instead of grabbing her things and leaving like a normal, rational person, she stormed out of the water, dripping onto my patio, and stomped toward my wife with the furious energy of a customer demanding to speak to a manager. "You need to delete that video right now," she shrieked, hands clenched into fists. My wife, completely unfazed, held her phone up higher, tilting her head. "Why? You're committing a crime, lady." "I'm just documenting it." Karen made an incoherent noise of frustration, her face twisting in pure outrage, before she did something that nearly sent me into another dimension. She reached out and slapped the phone out of my wife's hand. There was a moment of absolute silence. Even the birds stopped chirping. My wife slowly turned her head, looking at her now phoneless hand, then down at the device lying face down on the concrete. She let out a slow, measured breath, the kind someone takes when they are 1 second away from losing every ounce of patience they have left. I took a cautious step forward, but before I could intervene, Karen puffed out her chest and sneered, "Maybe next time, don't record people without their consent." My wife's eyes flicked up, and the dangerous calm on her face sent a shiver down my spine. "You just made a huge mistake," she said, voice eerily even. Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. What are you gonna do? Call the cops? Go ahead. I'll tell them you attacked me and stole my phone." That was the moment I realized we weren't just dealing with a delusional entitlement problem. This woman was actually insane. Before I could even think of what to do next, the situation took another unexpected turn. The side gate creaked open again, and this time I saw my next-door neighbor, Tom, stepping onto the property, holding a beer and looking thoroughly confused. "Hey, what's going on here?" Tom was the kind of neighbor who mostly kept to himself, but he was also the kind of guy who knew everything that happened in the neighborhood. He was our unofficial source of local gossip, and if something ridiculous went down, he always knew about it before anyone else. Karen's eyes lit up when she saw him, and suddenly she switched gears, putting on a pitiful, wounded expression. "Oh, thank God, Tom. You know me. Please tell these people I belong here. They're trying to kick me out for no reason." She dramatically placed a hand on her chest like she was about to faint, playing the victim in an Oscar-worthy performance. Tom just stared at her, blinking slowly, then looked at me and my wife. What?" My wife gestured to Karen, deadpan. "She broke into our yard, jumped into our pool, assaulted me, and now she's trying to pretend she lives here." Tom let out a long, exhausted sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. "For the love of... Karen, are you serious?" My eyebrows shot up. "Wait, you actually know her?" "Unfortunately," Tom muttered, taking a sip of his beer. "She used to live in the house next door before the new owners moved in a year ago. But she still acts like she owns the whole damn neighborhood. Got into a screaming match with the guy who bought her old place because she kept walking into his backyard, too." The pieces clicked together in my head instantly. This woman had never had any real agreement with the previous owners of my house. She had just decided she still had access to everything she wanted after moving out and bullied people into going along with it. "That's it," my wife said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I'm done. I'm calling the police." Karen immediately snapped out of her victim act, her face twisting into rage again. "You can't do that. They'll believe me over you." My wife didn't even acknowledge her, just lifted her phone and started dialing. Karen let out a scream of frustration, turned on her heel, and because, clearly, she had no survival instincts, launched herself back into the pool. I kid you not. She actually jumped into the water again, like some unhinged mermaid trying to reclaim her territory. My neighbor let out a stunned laugh, shaking his head. "Yep, that's about what I expected." I dragged a hand down my face, already exhausted. This is the dumbest day of my life. And just as my wife finished explaining the situation to the dispatcher, we heard it. The distant wail of approaching sirens. Karen froze mid-backstroke, her expression finally shifting to one of panic. "Wait," she said, voice shaky. "You actually called them?" My wife crossed her arms, nodding. "Hope you can swim fast, lady. 'Cause you're about to get out of that pool in handcuffs." Karen stared at us, looked at the gate, looked back at us, then did the only thing that made sense in her delusional mind. She dove under the water. Because apparently disappearing was a valid defense strategy. Tom took another sip of his beer and sighed. "Man, I love this neighborhood." The moment Karen dove underwater like she was attempting some kind of great escape, I genuinely considered whether she had completely lost her mind or if this was just her last desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. The sirens were getting louder, and there she was, submerged in my pool as if she believed the cops would take one look at the water and decide, nope, no crime here, just a free-range lunatic enjoying a swim. My wife, still holding her phone, let out a deep sigh and shook her head, clearly beyond exhausted with this entire ordeal. Tom, our neighbor, watched with mild amusement, sipping his beer like he had front-row seats to the best reality TV show he'd ever witnessed. Meanwhile, I just stood there, hands on my hips, trying to comprehend the sheer absurdity of the situation. "So, do we just wait for her to come up for air?" I muttered. My wife glanced at her watch. "I give her 20 seconds before she realizes she's not a damn dolphin and has to face reality." True to her prediction, bubbles surfaced, and within moments, Karen shot up from the water, gasping for air, her wet hair plastered to her face, looking less like the regal pool queen she probably imagined herself to be and more like a drenched raccoon that had just realized it wandered into the wrong backyard. She wiped her face dramatically, blinking at all of us like she was expecting a standing ovation for whatever it was she thought she was accomplishing. I needed a moment to cool down," she stammered, her voice filled with artificial innocence. "I didn't want to escalate things." My wife let out a humorless laugh. "Oh honey, you pass escalating things about 20 illegal actions ago." Before Karen could respond, the flashing red and blue lights of the patrol car painted the street beyond our backyard, and the unmistakable sound of 2 doors slamming shut sent a visible shudder through her body. She turned her head just slightly toward the gate, her eyes darting back and forth, clearly calculating whether she could make a run for it before they made it into the yard. "Don't even think about it," I warned, taking a step forward, fully prepared to block the only available exit. My wife had already gone to greet the officers, leading them through the side entrance, and the second they stepped into view, Karen immediately switched into victim mode. It was honestly impressive how quickly she could shift gears from unhinged pool invader to poor, helpless woman being unfairly attacked by rude strangers. Her entire demeanor softened, her expression turning desperate yet composed, and her hands clasped together as if she was just an innocent party caught up in a misunderstanding. "Officers! Thank goodness you're here," she gushed, dragging herself out of the pool and attempting to make herself look as pitiful as possible, her soaking wet clothes sticking to her body in the most unflattering way. "I have been treated so horribly. These people have been threatening me and acting so aggressive. I feared for my safety, so I was just trying to stay away from them until you arrived." One of the officers, a tall, middle-aged man with the distinct look of someone who had seen every level of ridiculous human behavior, slowly turned his gaze toward me and my wife, then to Tom, who was still casually sipping his beer with the expression of a man who had been waiting for entertainment all week. "All right," the officer sighed. "Someone start explaining what's actually going on here." My wife, ever the efficient one, had already prepared for this and simply pulled up the video footage she had recorded on her phone before Karen slapped it away. "Here's everything you need to know," she said, hitting play. The moment the officers saw Karen waltzing into our backyard, acting like she owned the place, giving orders, and then dramatically cannonballing into our pool while we repeatedly told her to leave, their expressions went from neutral professionalism to barely concealed exasperation. When it got to the part where Karen slapped the phone out of my wife's hand and started screaming, One of the officers let out a deep sigh, rubbing his temples like he could already feel the paperwork piling up. "Ma'am," he said, turning toward Karen, who had gone pale as a sheet, "do you want to explain why exactly you're trespassing on their property, ignoring their repeated demands to leave, and—" He glanced back at the phone footage, rewinding to the slap, physically assaulting the homeowner? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, her brain clearly short-circuiting as she tried to find a way to spin this in her favor. You don't understand," she finally screeched, pointing an accusing finger at us. "This pool has been open to the community for years. The previous owners let me use it all the time. I have every right to be here." The officer exchanged a tired glance with his partner before turning back to her. "Ma'am, the previous owners selling the house means that any informal agreements they made no longer apply. This is private property now, and these homeowners have made it very clear that you are trespassing. You can't just claim ownership of something that isn't yours." Karen let out a high-pitched, disbelieving laugh, as if she couldn't possibly fathom why the universe was punishing her for simply trying to exist as her entitled self. But I live here," she suddenly blurted. "Or I used to. Doesn't that count for something?" The second the words left her mouth, her face froze, realizing she had just given herself away. The officers didn't even need further clarification. "So you admit that you don't actually live here anymore?" one of them asked dryly. Karen hesitated, then folded her arms, glaring at the ground like a child about to throw a tantrum. "I shouldn't have to explain myself to you," she muttered. The officer took out his notepad. "All right then. Here's what's happening. You're being charged with trespassing, and given the footage of you hitting this woman's phone, possibly assault. I'd recommend you cooperate." Karen's entire body stiffened, and for a moment, I could see the war happening inside her head. She could either continue arguing, which would likely end with her in handcuffs, or she could try to minimize the damage by pretending to be cooperative. She took a deep breath, wiping water off her face, and forced a weak, trembling smile. Okay, she said, raising her hand slightly. "Maybe I got a little carried away. But I wasn't trying to cause trouble. She sniffled, trying to force tears. "I just wanted to relive old memories, you know? This place meant so much to me. I didn't mean any harm. Can't we just let this go?" The officer, entirely unmoved by her sudden attempt at sympathy, shook his head. "No, ma'am, we can't. If they want to press charges, that's their right." Karen immediately snapped her head toward us, her entire face crumbling into panic. "You wouldn't do that to me, would you?" she gasped. "I mean, come on, don't you think this is a little extreme?" I stared at her, completely and utterly done with every molecule of her existence. My wife, standing beside me, crossed her arms. "You slapped my phone out of my hand. You ignored every warning to leave. You literally cannonballed into our pool while trespassing. And now you think we're being extreme." Karen opened her mouth, but before she could respond, Tom chuckled and said, "Lady, I think they've been more patient with you than most people would have been. If it were me, I'd have hosed you down the second you stepped foot in my yard." Karen scowled, her face turning red, but before she could attempt another excuse, the officers took out their cuffs. "All right, ma'am, turn around." She let out an outraged gasp. "You're arresting me?" "That's how trespassing charges work," one of them said dryly. "Especially when you refuse to leave multiple times." As they clicked the cuffs around her wrists, she shrieked in protest, launching into a rambling mess of complaints about how unfair this was, how she was a good person, how we had ruined her life, and how this was all just a misunderstanding. The officers guided her toward the gate, and just before they led her out, she whipped her head around, glaring at me. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret this." I smiled. "Looking forward to it." Tom let out another laugh. "Well, that was fun. What's next?" My wife sighed. "I need a drink. I need therapy," I muttered. And with that, we watched as Karen was driven away, screaming in protest, leaving us to finally enjoy our backyard in peace.